This is the Backpass, a podcast for sports nerds by sports nerds.
Welcome to the Backpass. This week, we talk about the rise of franchise cricket. This week on the Backpass Explains, we bat around the rise of franchise cricket. I'm your host, Ali Malwala, and I am joined by our regulars, Kevin and Shivank. Welcome, lads.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Great to have you guys here. We're talking about some really interesting rise of franchise cricket and going into the depth and history of cricket as well. So there's a lot to cover here. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. We're going to go through history, the importance of representative cricket, and the cricket's new age and the growth, and how cricket makes money too, and how the cricketers make money. So there's a lot to cover. Let's get started. History of international cricket. Shivank, how did cricket spread around the globe?
Yeah, always ask the analytical guy to answer a question like this. Now, look, the sport of cricket was practically an English sport. It was played by the English elite, and hence, it's called the gentleman's game and everything. And really,
Spirit of cricket. Anyway.
Yep. And that's how cricket basically spread. So wherever the English colonized, the upper hierarchy of their contingent over there basically played cricket. And that's why you see English countries colonized by England are the main players of cricket up until the longest time. But now you're seeing a slight change in it, where you're seeing some of the European countries like Romania and stuff come in, or the Netherlands come in. But yeah, the English played it, all their colonies played it, and then about 125 odd years ago, the ICC was formed. Not the International Cricket Council, but the Imperial Cricket Council, which basically regulated the countries under the imperial rule that played cricket. And that started off with England, surprise, surprise, South Africa, that's a different one, and Australia. So these three countries basically started playing cricket, and one after the other, they slowly started adding other teams into it. Up until that point, cricket was a multi-day sport. It was not in the modern form. You played it over 5 or 6 days. You had a rest day in between and everything of that sort. In and around the time of World War II, both New Zealand and India also joined in. And then after World War II, when Pakistan officially became a country, they got involved as well. And then, it's somewhere in between. West Indies joined as well, pre-World War II. So that's what the makeup of the ICC was back then. And guess what? Most of it has stayed pretty strong still. Like, you've still got the main 8 to 10 countries that play a lot of cricket, and then you've got associate nations made up by the newer brass of cricket playing countries. So yeah, that is how cricket spread.
Wow. And to think of it, West Indies aren't going to be at the World Cup this year as well, considering they joined the ICC, the Imperial Cricket. That's due knowledge.
Yeah.
I wonder when they rebranded. When they decided that, hey, maybe we should take out the imperial part of our title.
I'm guessing when a lot of colonies broke free.
Yeah, but that was just now the new moniker is Commonwealth, right? Sounds more inclusive.
Yeah. It sounds more inclusive. Yes, it does. So then, why then, Kevin, is the representative nature of cricket? Why is the international game so important in cricket?
Well, because unlike most sports we follow, like the football, rugby league, the international game in cricket is, for all intents and purposes, the core of the game. Cricket's franchise forms aren't very well known, and the tribalism exists at the international level. So a great example is the Ashes series that's going on at the moment. without the Ashes series, or if you were trying to compare that to a equivalent, that would be Man City versus Man U. It's that level of derby, that level of tribalism, that level of intensity. So cricket as a whole is flipped on its head, where the international game takes the core of the sport and the core popularity. It's what draws in the crowds for the longest period of time. And it was also moving into the more, I guess, personal aspects of it. Its anti-establishment nature of international cricket has allowed for like these colonies to assert their authority. So, the fact that India, like when we talk about cricket as an Indian, we think about movies. There is probably only one movie that comes to mind.
But that is kind of like that is part of the essence of representative cricket, right? It was about that anti-establishment. It's about them versus us, and it's about bringing down, like, the colonizers almost. It was always like, can we become good enough to beat the people who taught us the game or who colonized our country, and to kind of get some payback almost.
Yeah, it's funny because I think the first international test or international game was between the US and Canada, and it never really picked up in there in the US or Canada. Canada a little bit more nowadays, but I get the feeling that's probably because they beat the British. So they technically, even though India has its own republic, they never actually fought a war with the English and won. And they stayed a part of the Commonwealth, during that process. Whereas this probably ties back into how that tribalism works. Like, there is a sense of satisfaction in Australia when Australia beats England in an Ashes series, and it's just, if you really think about it, none of the people involved, none of the people who are watching, they don't really have any connection to why that's important. Like, the colonialism has long gone, but somehow it's still there, and it's
just ingrained in culture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same thing is true between India and Australia. If you think about it, like all of those memories, Eden Gardens, Harbhajan Singh doing somersaults at the MCG, like all that kind of stuff is ingrained into your psyche of, what it means to play cricket.
And then moving along from there, and then we kind of get into, I guess, cricket growing up, and shifting away to like the new age of cricket that we get into, shifting away from nationalism towards becoming something that can actually make a lot of money, and watching some of the bigger countries, or some of the bigger cricketing countries, actually really ramp up. You think about the 83 World Cup, where a lot of the Indian players who won the World Cup were, partially paying, some of them were partially paying their own way, or finding creative ways to be able to make some of those payments happen, to travel and to bear the cost of all that travel and being away for those periods, compared to now, where those players are, have everything kind of paid and accounted for, and they're almost living like rock stars.
What do you mean almost living like rock stars? I think they've gone above and beyond rock stars.
Correct it. The rock stars are almost living like cricketers now.
But that's really only true in India, right? Like, if you think about it, nowhere else in the world is...
Yes, and that's sad as well.
No, it's an interesting point, because I think it's almost impossible for cricket to survive without having some eye on money. You can't, like, the West Indies sort of is the poster child of exactly this concept. Money in NBA and in American football meant that the West Indian cricket had taken massive step backs from a talent perspective, and because it's just not competitive. Like you understand, a lot of these people are coming from, like even in India, they're coming from places where it's extreme poverty. So they're going to focus on money, and there needs to be an outlet that's sort of geared towards that. The problem with international cricket is that it doesn't fund well because at the end of the day, it's a governing body is tied into the government, and there's only a set amount of funds that you can put forward to that. So most modern day cricketers, if they're living off the international purse pocket for their salary, then they'll probably have to do a lot of marketing deals outside of that to generate additional incomes, to have enough of a salary for their career to set them up afterwards.
And that's an interesting dynamic as well. Like if you had to compare that aspect of cricket to FIFA, right? So if you compare ICC and FIFA, and we know both corrupt as bad as each other, you could say, but FIFA very, very, very specific in terms of the football association for the national teams have to be separate from the governing body and from the governing body of the country. So they have to be separate from the politics side of it, where you're kind of saying that in cricket, that's almost like it's kind of, it's a government, there's a government cricket association. So it's kind of connected.
No, but the funding, like the funding is tied heavily into it. Like they get so many government grants. It's similar to, it's not quite the same as the Olympics, but it's very similar to, how the Olympics is run. All of the grassroots are run by. I can only speak for Australia because I haven't lived in New Zealand, and I haven't spent enough time in India to be able to speak to how BCCI is run. But all the grassroots, they're tied to Cricket Australia, which Cricket Australia is funded at some level by the government, which is taxpayers' dollars.
That's very cool. And that's a really, really good point, Kevin. I think we'll come back to that one later, but that is a really, really vital point about kind of how player development and growth happens in cricket as well. But, so about that making money, and part of that also became, why don't we introduce more formats of cricket? Why cricket grow in that direction? Why don't we modernize the game and bring some modern kind of excitement to it? Shivank, one of our favorite formats, ODI. We love to hate it.
There's no better way of putting it.
But it was controversial, right? Like when it first came out.
It first came out, 100%. But it was born out of necessity. Like international cricket was losing viewership, and people just didn't have the patience to watch a 6-day game. Ironically enough, people don't have the patience to watch an 8-hour game now. But look, that's basically the origins of the thing. And then an Australian by the name of Kerry Packer decided, you know what, let's cash in on the fact that cricket has a dying interest stream right now, and the players aren't making enough money. So if we combine this with a lot of marketing, with a lot of glitz and glamour, maybe we come up with a format that actually has a lot of brand value associated with it. And so was, you get the modern version of ODI cricket. You get colored clothings, you get white ball, you get day-night formats. Why restrict yourself to just hours of daylight?
And that did bring a lot of excitement, right? I mean, you had that early versions of the ODI cricket, and it was like 60 overs, and you had Sunil Gavaskar, who opened the innings, ball 1, and was also faced the last ball of the 60 overs, scoring, I believe, off the top of my head, I think he either scored like 37 or he scored 65 runs.
Something like that. Something like that.
Batting 60 overs.
Can you imagine?
Yay for T20.
Can you imagine any modern day player doing that in any format of the game, batting 60 overs and coming back with 37? Or maybe Pujara. Maybe Pujara. But that's basically how cricket grew. And we have the modern version of ODI cricket. Now, when you have two formats only, Test and ODI, the ODI was pretty successful at being the revolutionary format, and then
almost started taking preference as well.
Yeah. And then you started seeing multilateral series, tri-series, or the Asia Cups or whatever. And then you started seeing rule changes like fielding restrictions coming in or anything down leg side being a wide, just to spice up the game a bit more.
Yeah.
Whereas Test cricket always remained the purest form of the game without any major rule changes, unless absolutely necessary, of course.
Yep. We were talking about body line for sure on that one. And, that also brought in, like you said, the competitions and the tournaments, right? Like we got the World Cup.
Exactly.
Without ODI, we don't have the World Cup. There was, we're still trying to figure out how to do a World Cup with Test cricket. Let's face it, we don't. We have one. It doesn't make sense at the moment.
No.
So then it's starting to be like, basically coming out of like, almost going from that transition of coming out from black and white into the color world, I think it almost happened at the same time. So you went from black and white TV and you went from the white Test clothing into that color of one-day cricket and color TVs. It almost seemed like a revolution all at the same time, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't really So, the schism happened. But if you think about it, it sort of speaks to how cricket as a whole is so traditional, because it still kept Test cricket, and Test cricket was still heavily followed even post that period. Like, it almost enhanced Test cricket. Whereas if you look at other sports, the rule change would have just happened to if they thought that it was going to work, that they would have just got rid of Test cricket and they would have just stuck with one-day cricket, for instance. And you would have just evolved the game, keep going. You'd lose that history.
That this would now be what is cricket.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like this would be the now form of cricket, but never get rid of the old one. The spirit of the game wouldn't allow it. The spirit is holding on tight to Test cricket.
Yeah, and there is some history, and there's some. I think it's still true to this very day that there are people who only watch Test cricket, who only enjoy Test cricket, hate IPL, hate T20, hate one-day cricket, regardless of any positive experience that they might have had with it. Going to see a live game, they still watch Test cricket. And I've got friends and family friends who are willing to sit through 5 days of a draw, but are not willing to sit through an hour or 8 hours of one-day cricket. So,
are you counting me in that category, Kevin?
Not particularly, no, but because you do sit down and watch IPL.
Even the vice versa. Now you have like all these audiences who T20 cricket and one-day cricket, but you literally, like, if they were flicking a channel and Test cricket was on, they'd be like, yeah, moving on. It just almost be like, not doing that. I'm not doing that to myself and watching Test cricket. And then it's kind of weird. It's all the same sport, right? Well, technically the same sport.
Technically the same sport, yeah.
It's the same sport because sometimes the same players play it.
And with the same ball and a roughly
Well, it's not even the same ball. Is it really the same ball?
Oh, yeah. It's same bats. They at least have the same bats.
Yeah, the bats are the same.
The ball is slightly different and depends on who makes the ball too.
The wickets are different as well between each format. The pitches are different. The size of the field is different. Yeah.
Yeah. They really should just be different sports, right? Like, we're talking about different sports now, right? We should just call it a different sport. I guess we are lazy. We're the ones who call it cricket.
Yeah.
It's not the sport's fault.
Yeah. Like, if we can call indoor cricket as a separate thing, let's just call it. These things are separate things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Just played in a similar manner, or roughly the similar manner that looks kind of similar to other things.
It is a bit of time traveling when you watch Test cricket after you've watched one day in T20, because you can tell that there's an age factor involved. It's kind of like the wigs that lawyers wear in the UK.
I still do not like the numbers and names on the back of test shirts.
Really?
Yeah.
I still feel like there's a little bit of it should just be white,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels weird to have that number. Maybe just a name. I don't know. It doesn't need a number.
I do like a slightly tattered. Maybe you can call this a fetish, but I do like a slightly tattered, worn out Test cricket cap. I think there's something about that. I don't know what it is, but
especially when it builds that white line of sweat
yes.
Sweat around the headband,
just like that wavy line that goes around.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly, that.
Oh God, that is some weird fetish you have there, Kevin.
It's this guy's done the hard yards.
It's like, oh, that's a cap that's a well hat.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was Steve Waugh's final test. His band broke. His elastic snapped, and I was like, "Wow, okay, that's been lived in. That's gone through some hard yards." And now I think I've seen a couple of caps in the I think Steve Smith's and a few others that I've seen recently in the Ashes tour that look like they've reached that level. I'm starting to think whether they make them as well as they used to, because they seem like they're degrading a lot faster nowadays. So I don't.
It's probably because of how much they get thrown.
Yeah.
To the ground.
If there's anything that the test documentary's shown us, is that it gets abused quite a bit. But no, apparently after a certain number of tests, you can request a new hat.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
And they give you.
I wouldn't do that. So it's a budget thing. I didn't think it was a budget thing. I thought you just walked out to the Cricket Australia store and you buy another one.
No,
because they've got the numbers. They can't do that. They've got the numbers. Their numbers on it.
But you could stitch that at home.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same thing.
You just get like a green thread.
No, it's gold. It's gold. Actually, what is it? What is it for the Indian team? Is it white?
It's blue.
Blue and white?
Well, the hat's blue. I think the text is yellow or a light shade of yellow.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, and then, cricket growing in popularity in different parts of the world as well, as we kind of have that, the color and with the salaries now getting higher. And we've seen different parts of cricket, different areas of cricket grow in different parts of the world. Kevin, Australia, New Zealand, cricket's actually gone up during the whole COVID period. The cricket popularity, but not in the way we expected, or not in the places that's traditional.
Yeah, exactly. It went up in the women's game, which is fantastic, because I think cricket is one of the sports. Cricket and tennis probably I put at the same level, where it's a watchable sport. This is why I haven't included golf. It's a watchable sport where the women's game, I think, is, for all intents and purposes, it can be almost the same level of skill as you get in the men's game. I think with other sports, I'm not saying it's not possible. I just think it'll take a long time to get to that point. The investment that's required from a grassroots level, it's a bit different on cricket. I don't know why, but you can fast track that a little bit and develop grassroots, and it's evident because the women's game is fantastic to watch. And it's certainly to the point, the T20 levels, certainly to the point where I think they should start seriously considering maybe making the boundaries a little bit wider. I remember about when I was in high school, there was somebody that I studied with who was a up-and-coming female cricketer. At the time, there was no money in the sport, and there was not a lot of development. And it was it was a bit of a novelty. But nowadays, I think in the last 10 years at least, the development that Cricket Australia has put into it, not just Cricket Australia, but this is probably one area where the BCCI has had some investment. The women's game is quite competitive on all fronts. It's not like it's just England. It's England, Australia, New Zealand's coming up as well. India's doing well.
Yeah. And speaking about BCCI's investment in the women's game, in some places the women's teams are doing just as well as the men's team. Like the RCB women's team, stacked with talent, but still doesn't make it to the playoffs, just like the men's team.
Well, you look at some of the countries in which the women's team are outperforming the men's team as well, right? Like the Thailand women's team, and there are some other countries as well along that who are closer to making a World Cup and actually performing at a World Cup than the men's are.
Yeah,
I reckon that's really good for the sport in general.
Yeah, and there was a question that just hit me, Kevin. You mentioned high school. Now I know everyone listening wants to know: is high school for you before or after Shivank was born? I guess it's I don't know if this is throwing shade at Shivank or if this is throwing shade at
yeah.
Kevin.
This probably
which way this one's going.
If I answer this question, it probably puts me in a very interesting bracket. Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm willing to do that.
So answer carefully, Kevin. Like, how old do you want to be considered?
Young enough that I'm still relevant. Old enough that I can, hold a conversation with.
Right?
Yeah, sound knowledgeable, basically. Yeah, that's a sweet spot. I don't know where that is, but I'm not sure if my answer is going to get me there.
Young enough to laugh at this question, old enough to know not to answer it. Anyway, moving on. Like women's cricket has been great, and that basically brought like a whole extension to the sport of cricket. And there's also that opportunity to rethink cricket in the women's space. It doesn't have to follow that men's format. And we're talking about franchise cricket and talking about why can't it be different from why can't it be different and break up that international monotony in women's cricket.
I mean, so one of the things we spoke offline about is the reason why cricket doesn't get as tribal at a franchise level yet other sports like football might be, is just because of the whole generational thing. Like, we have grown up with generations, and Kevin made the same point, that international cricket is what dominated the scene, whereas franchise cricket was an afterthought. And in the other sports, it's the other way around. With women's cricket, it's a blank slate.
Yep.
By and large, a blank slate. So if you redefine the rules that the women's game is more franchise focused and less international focused, then, it might just be the vehicle the game needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a world that'd be interesting to live in, to see this. Then that would make cricket one of the only sports in which the women's game leads the men's game in terms of where the game is actually heading.
Yeah, and having that open to like kind of growth into new areas and new avenues. And talking about new avenues, like I don't hear anyone talking about Test cricket as a franchise, and why wouldn't that work? Would that be interesting to watch? Having an IPL Test series, IPL Test tournament.
Yeah. Look, I think if you were able to put aside all of the Test diehards, the traditionalists, and you're able to make Test cricket, I guess, kind of sexy enough to franchise, it's probably the best way to say it. Because the only way that franchise cricket or any franchise sport works is the branding. You see this with the BBL and the IPL. That's one of their trademarks. If you've got good branding, at the same time, you have to pick names that are not just specific to the area. And I have
another set of super kings,
yeah, God.
or super giants.
Like you don't.
Supers.
Oh god.
Or Rising Giants.
I feel like whoever the marketing teams are involved in the IPL, and we'll talk about IPL at a later point, but whoever involved in that, and this is not just the IPL, it's a BBL too, because some of their names are terrible. They just like taxed it straight from the US sports, like the Heat, Scorchers. Yeah, it's like, come on, guys. Like, pick an animal.
I know we don't give them enough shit, but I know we don't throw enough dirt around in their direction, but honestly, Mumbai have a pretty terrible name as well. I mean, for God's sake, it's like, being like, we're gonna call our team the Sydney Australians. It's like, say, you couldn't think of anything. You just went with that.
The other parallel is, imagine having a Canberra Capitals.
Yeah. Delhi Capitals.
Who comes up? Who comes up with these names, for crying out loud?
Yeah.
Well, clearly, people who have a lot of things to do and not enough time to think about great ideas. Too much money to.
There's way too many kings in the IPL. Like there's so many kings.
But isn't that a true representation of India? If you really boil it down.
Oh dear. Sorry, the question.
It kind of goes back to its almost colonial days, right? Of before colonialism, where there were a lot of kings in India. We're taking back what is ours.
Yeah. Very, very anti-establishment. Yes.
Yeah, I guess we're still living the same sentiment one way or another.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Coming back to the question.
But how would it work? How would Test cricket as a franchise actually work? So if we had, say, like IPL,
I don't think IPL would work.
There was like BBL equal.
No, like we spoke to Gurpreet previously, good friend of the show. When he was explaining it sort of gave me a little bit of light bulb. The tribalism is not going to work and that's what Test cricket's all about. Test cricket is the purest form of tribalism in cricket. And you're not going to generate that if you just try and do like Ranji Trophy equivalent. It's just not going to happen. Even the IPL auction style is detrimental to that. Like you need to somehow generate some kind of tribalism or try and copy across. Now, the only tribalism, the most obvious tribalism is the international tribalism. So maybe as Gurpreet was saying, you could split it up into regions and try and focus on that. The added issue there is, well, who would want to watch that, and how would you get that above board? And after the novelty wears off, will people still be watching that?
Yeah. Yeah. How many people really want to watch, say, Tamil Nadu play Sussex?
Well,
actually, maybe that's a. You picked
a. But any interest in Tamil Nadu versus Sussex?
Yeah. I'm actually thinking, let's spice it up. Let's play it at the Vaka.
Why not? Right? Like, why not have picking a county team? I guess now we're looking at county and kind of List A cricket, as ICC calls it, and setting up a List A Cricket World Cup where you have, every country gets whatever coefficients, and then they all get together in one country, and you won't have any crossover between players because generally don't, unless you're an overseas player in another for like one of the teams.
Yeah, but you'll have the same issue as what you have with international cricket right now, which is you have a core of maybe 5 teams that can win the Test World Championship, and that's about it. And even out of that 5, probably only 3 are relevant in any test cycle. So, it's not like what I would expect to happen in that scenario is that England, Australia, India would be, dominant. And then you would have occasional New Zealand, occasional Pakistan, maybe Sri Lanka. I doubt West Indies unless if the money's there. So I think there's a talent limitation when it comes to Test cricket as well. it's the fundamental flaw with List A cricket. It's like if you're watching Sheffield Shield, no offense to those who play Sheffield Shield, but Cricket Australia is only going to develop enough players for the international team to be successful, right? And if we're honest, that's between 20 and 30 players. That's not enough for you to be able to have an ongoing franchise series and have it really entertaining, or at least at the level where it would work in international cricket. You'd have the Bairstow situation where you stopped like 5 catches in one test series and there's no other player to pick. So it's not going to be, I think like you'd need a lot of work to get to that level where it's, the
I
EPL.
assume that analogy was going a different way. I thought you were going to talk about how you talking about the Bairstow situation where a lot of young players would walk out of their crease. Just, they don't know. They thought it was a done deal or the ball was dead. But you would think that a lot of players or a lot of youngsters who are potentially just talented athletes who are like getting to 18, 19 and going, am I actually going to get a Cricket Australia contract, or am I better off, putting my effort towards basketball or rugby league or rugby or AFL, because I'd like to play cricket, but there's no guarantee of me getting a Cricket Australia contract and being stuck in Sheffield Shield for the rest of my career, or no, not Sheffield Shield.
Yeah, Sheffield Shield.
What's the Australian?
Yeah,
it's Sheffield, right? Yeah. Or go into rugby league or rugby, or even rugby, or AFL or basketball even, and there's a chance that I can actually have a more successful career, a more satisfying career.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the point, right? Like basketball is a good example of a sport in Australia that's now starting to develop, and you're starting to see a lot of Australian players get into that higher earning bracket in the NBA. Like, Ben Simmons is the most obvious example of an Australian-born player, Novocastrian, who's developed enough to be, I think it was like the number 1 pick in the NBA. So, that's happening. So you're going to get talent siphoned off that way. And, people like to talk about, Andrew Simmons, he could have played rugby league. He ended up playing cricket. But for every Andrew Simmons, there is probably, 50 odd other players who chose rugby league over cricket. And that's just, it's earning potential. It's, the clubs themselves. So you can generate, notoriety. You have after sport, career paths. There's, in coaching for things like that. In cricket, for the longest time, especially on the test side, there is no other earning potential once you hang up those boots. Like you'd have to go work in the IPL.
And that's exactly the big reason, and the big reason we're having this conversation is because that franchise cricket actually brings a lot to the sport, because now suddenly it's not just 8 or 9 different countries having a squad of 30 players each. Suddenly you can have a lot more players who are earning at a higher amount, right? So suddenly you're gone from, say, only 300 players who are actually earning at a high level, because you still think that a lot of players in West Indies and Bangladesh aren't quite at that, pay scale level, and maybe even New Zealand, maybe half the team isn't. But with franchise cricket, you have that opportunity for it to be, thousands, be potentially at that higher pay scale level. And that is exactly what we want to get into. And I think that's probably the best cutoff point that I can think of for this episode. So you'll have to join us for part 2, where we really go even deeper into franchise cricket and T20 and why all of that ties in, and why cricket world needs us, why the cricketing world needs us. So thank you for listening. As always, you can get in touch with us on our socials, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Backpass Pod. Please get in touch, and always happy to have you be sports nerdy with us. Thank you for joining, Kevin and Shivank. We'll see you next week.